Welcome to What's in Store with Carly and Chris, the show where we cover hot topics at the cross section of retail and real estate. I'm your host, Karly Iacono, and I'm joined by my co-host, Chris Ressa. Chris, good morning.
Good morning.
Where's the energy? Come on. This is a fun, exciting episode. I need more than that. That was flat.
Good morning, Carly. How are you?
Yes, I've been waiting for that. It's taken years, but thank you. Thank you for that. We are avoiding the political noise. We're avoiding the negativity in the world, and we're talking about the World Cup. So buckle up. Today is a fun episode, still retail real estate related, don't worry, but how the World Cup is going to impact retail real estate beyond just the games that are going to be played. You ready?
I'm ready. I'm excited.
Okay, good. Glad to hear it. So let's start with a framing of how massive the World Cup is, because this is unlike any other sporting event, maybe the Olympics. Okay, maybe the Olympics, but any other single sporting event. To me, this seems just so much bigger. So give me the stats. I know you have them at the tip of your fingers.
Well, I think the first piece is that if you look at host Olympic cities and the positive economic impact that those Olympics had on that, and in the U.S. we've had a bunch, right? We had Lake Placid, we've had Los Angeles, Atlanta, Salt Lake City, right? When Salt Lake City got that, right now Salt Lake City, think about Salt Lake, whatever it is, 20 years later, it's this vibrant, dominant market, and Salt Lake City previously wasn't thought of as that from an institutional investing perspective. And now it got all these tailwinds that happened from the exposure and the economic impact from the World Cup. So the Olympics at that time. Now the World Cup, another massive, what I like to call a reason to spend for U.S. consumers is coming. This is, really interesting because there's so many host cities. There's like 11 host cities.
I think there's 16.
Or 16
Yeah.
host cities. And then I think one of the things that can't be understated is the amount of international tourists. So we're going to have, right, and post-COVID, bringing back the international tourism to the U.S. was a climb. It took a bit, depending on how each individual city handled post-COVID impacts. And then there was some habitual nature that happened to those cities around tourism. This is a huge boost, right? They're talking, over 1.2 million visitors expected to come, and of which, 720,000 of those visitors wouldn't have come to the United States otherwise. That doesn't even take into account all the domestic excitement around the World Cup, right? I was talking to a friend in the industry who is taking his sons, they're flying to Seattle, driving to Los Angeles to go catch individual games. And they're making a trip around this and a vacation around this. These are things that wouldn't happen if the World Cup wasn't coming. You then take in just the simple, I think what people think about, right? Like, are there going to be watch parties, and are throwing at their house, right? Are we going to end up, going to bars and restaurants to watch games? I think the answer to all of that is yes. And all that spending that happens because of that, I think, is really good for retail and retail real estate.
So we know the restaurants, we know the merchandise stores right around some of the venues. How far reaching do you think this is going to be? Because there's a big difference to going to a stadium for a game, getting in your car and leaving, or maybe walking and being part of a, a fan area that's set up and staying for the day or a week in an area. So and I guess this is probably location specific, right? Some venues are set up differently than others, but aside from just restaurants and immediate merchandise, where else do you think we'll see some of the effects?
So I think at first is like, one of the things that always matters is how well certain teams do. That impacts spending, right? If you just think about uh, any host, any town, right? You think about, Philadelphia when they won the Super Bowl and all the craze around that, and then they had Jason Kelsey and his wife and all these tailwinds that impacted economic, output out of that city. Additionally, you have all the ancillary jobs created to be able to support the World Cup, right? Whether that's some infrastructure, whether that's security, whatever it might be, there's a lot of economic output that happens from the World Cup. It generates billions of dollars of economic output. And so I think that matters. But like I have like this man cave-ish room that's like a well done sports themed thing, and that I'm trying to tighten up for this football season, but I've accelerated the timing on that so that I can probably host some people over to watch World Cup games. Right? I'm
So
probably
you're
not going to
really
go out.
a microcosm then of the
Yeah,
city, right?
right.
You're accelerating your infrastructure improvements to be able to handle the additional tourism that's coming to your location. I mean, but that's a perfect example of what is happening on the larger scale, right? The money is being invested in these cities that will be there long after the event ends. And I think that's really
Bingo.
what you see from the Olympics that's so interesting. It's not just that people come and they go to a restaurant, they buy a shirt and they leave. It's that the cities really have to accommodate such a massive shift in population for that period of time that there is spending that has to occur outside of just the bars and restaurants to accommodate it that stays long after. And I think that's a really interesting effect. Have you heard any stats or anything around infrastructure in particular, or any cities that are really needing to make changes before the World Cup?
I don't know the here's what I do know is like uh, the Los Angeles host committee cites like 515 million in direct visitor spending and 829 million of total economic output. Atlanta area has a description of like 503 million of economic impact, and explicitly says it is conservative and focused on out of state attendee spending. That's what Atlanta said. So I, I think these are just massive numbers that I think is not being talked about enough in retail real estate space. Obviously, World Cup from the sports industry is talked about a lot. The whole hotel industry, hospitality, right? CoStar and Tourism Economics forecast about a 1.7% increase in U.S. RevPAR, which is like the that I think analyzes average rate of stay. Right, hotel prices will obviously rise. Right, um, good for the hospitality industry, and so that's a bit of what I would say from economic output, and how that relates to you know, uh, the infrastructure per se. I think is a lot of that money is probably spent, but now they have that infrastructure to be able to support this going forward. So, obviously jobs will be created.
I mean, that's the piece that I think is so interesting because it's long term. You've got the job creation, you have the shot in the arm of the spending, but to me that feels like wow, it's going to be an incredible month for these markets. But then what? But I think if you can see the long term effects from the infrastructure spending, that's really where the value for investors in the next phase comes from. And then secondarily, you're almost pressure testing a city or maybe a suburban market if it's not downtown with what could future growth look like? How do we support future events? And maybe there's a use case there after the World Cup for other sporting events. Maybe not the Olympics, but something else kind of in between, because that area will have proven that it can handle that sort of population influx. So maybe it's a case for future opportunity as well.
For sure. I don't think the spending is just a shot in the arm if operators do it right. Like if you go out to a restaurant, it's your first time at the restaurant and you have an unbelievable experience, an unbelievable, the food is fantastic. What the normal thing happens is you go to that restaurant again. And so if I wouldn't have otherwise gone because of this reason to spend the World Cup, and now I'm now going, and now I like this operator, this venue. Well, that was pretty good. It's not just a one-time spend. I've now created a loyal customer.
So you think more of the activity, or I guess the long-term value, will come from domestic spending, and that a lot of the positive long-term growth we'll see is not necessarily just going to be the influx of foreign tourism. It's that our spending patterns are going to be changed locally. Is that the argument?
I'm not sure that's my argument. I'm just saying don't discount that. I'm not
Okay.
saying, I'm saying don't discount that. If you just look at the economic transition for some of the host cities, right? You just think about Atlanta. This was like a growing like market. And then the Olympics come in the mid 90s. And then what happened in like the early 2000s on? Like this was like the city like everyone was investing so much into was the Atlanta market, right? It grew leaps and bounds comparative to other cities. So I think that it's long lasting for a lot of different reasons. The infrastructure, the spending, the visibility, what it's done to potentially recruit future people to actually live there, job creation. There's a lot of long lasting things that I think it's one of the reasons that I think 2026 is going to be a strong year for our industry, right? There's a lot of reasons to spend Olympics, World Cup, America 250, and the biggest, I think, being the World Cup for the US because it's here. And we don't normally have those confluence events in any one year. But I don't think it wanes and makes it just a summer thing and then it goes, the economic impacts go away.
Yeah, it sounds like there's more long-term, truly relevant benefits. I was just looking for the list of host cities. Do you happen to have that handy? I mean, some of them, okay, here's some like LA, Miami, Atlanta. I think you could argue those are pretty established, but maybe they become more of a focus for tourism than they were previously. Dallas, Kansas City, that's an interesting one that could really benefit from some attention and growth. Are there any that stand out to you that might have outsized impacts from attention like this?
It's a good question. I haven't looked at it from that angle on a microcosm to any one individual city. I would say because I think one of the things when you look at this, it's like if you're hosting a trade show convention, you want to be in a place where that the city can accommodate those so that it doesn't have to go into mass scale infrastructure. That doesn't mean there won't be any done, but a lot of these cities feel like they have the ability to host. They're used to international tourism. Obviously, Kansas City is a little different. It doesn't get the international tourism of LA, New York, or Miami.
Miami?
But let me ask you: have you looked? Are you planning to go to any games? Like, there's lottery systems. It's right here locally in the New York area. You can go
No.
to some games, and
I
you live
am
not very
dying to
far.
go. I know. It's right here. It's right down the street. I think it's actually 15 minutes from my house, which is ridiculously close. But the tickets are very hard to get. So I entered several lotteries. I tried to get them when they first quote unquote were released, and they were like $4,000 a ticket or 2,800, I think, when I very first looked for nosebleeds. And so I was like, this can't possibly be true. I'm sure it's going to get better. It has not. So, no, I don't have a good solution yet, but I have not given up. How about you?
I don't have tickets yet. I like one of the answers is to go to, if you just want the experience of going to the World Cup, is to you could find some tickets to a game that's less popular than other games. If you're trying to go to a big game, it's going to be pricey and crazy, like going to a Super
Hmm.
Bowl.
I think I go to any game at this point just to say that I went, but it's
Exactly.
got to be at our local venue. So I don't know if you figure that out. Please let me know because don't let anyone else who's listening to the show know before you let me know because I'd like to grab some tickets. So it definitely seems like there's no shortage of demand. That was my takeaway there. Just trying to participate myself. It's very tricky.
Yes, for sure. Not easy. The whole lottery thing and
Yeah.
all that is wild.
Yeah.
But think about how many events do we have that are in, as you said, 16 host cities, and the only way, like for someone without connections to attend, is through a lottery,
Yeah. It's crazy.
right?
It just really shows you the demand, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's through
Really
a
is
lottery.
amazing. And I think, this is very exciting. It's going to be a lot of fun, figure out how to get there one way or another. But I think the long term effects, going back to the investor perspective, is really interesting. And it's something I'd love to put a pin in and revisit a year later to see, is there more investment activity? Is there more retail being built after the fact, right? Because they've just kind of proven how demand can grow over time because of all the factors we just said. I wonder what cities will see a material impact and how long it will take for it to show up. So maybe it's almost like an early time, again, probably not LA or Miami, but for some of the other cities to get in before these impacts really take hold down the line.
Well, I mean, you mentioned it like in the notes before the show, right? You mentioned that uh, some of these established, mature, internationally traveled cities, Barcelona, they dramatically improved waterfront development after the Olympics.
Right.
London accelerated redevelopment in East London. So I think this is, once again, I like this is what usually happens in the real estate space post um, or pre, during, and post event. And so I just don't know why this would be any different than that. Where it
Yep.
happens, how it happens, if you knew that, you know,
Well, we have a
the,
list of 16 cities to start with. People are always calling and asking, what market should I focus on? What are the next top markets? Maybe we just give them this list of 16 to start with.
there you go.
Could be an angle. There's
Could be.
probably already a fund started somewhere with someone with value add capital for the 16 World Cup cities, yada, yada, yada. So, I'm sure there's someone listening going, I've already done that. It's already being raised. So
Yeah.
you
I
never know.
mean, I can tell you this: I'm not going to drive around the stadium during World Cup. That I can tell you.
You're not going to drive outside looking for real estate?
No,
I mean,
meaning like from traffic as
oh, for
it's.
sure not.
Yeah, stay
Yeah,
away.
yeah. That's going to be challenging for sure.
Yeah.
Any sort of contrarian points or anything that maybe, what if we're wrong? What if this isn't as big as we think? What are some of the things that could make it be a little more muted of a reaction or, I guess, long term effect?
One more thing to add on the previous. So if you just look at like, I think you mentioned like what other beneficiaries are there? If you're coming to New York to go to the World Cup, are you going to do other things? If you've traveled from
Right.
overseas, you're going to go to New York. You're going to probably shop Soho. You're going to go out to eat somewhere, try a restaurant someone recommended, right? You're going to do other things. This event brings people here to experience the totality of a city, not just that one event, right? If you got tickets and the World Cup was in Barcelona, you wouldn't just go to the game, you know, grab a
Get back on the
sandwich and go
plane.
home,
Right.
right?
Exactly. No,
You
it's
would
true.
use that and do other things. And that's part of, right. You would go, tour Barcelona, tour Spain. You might go to Madrid just because you're not going to get to Spain often, right? I think
Right.
people are going to be doing that. It would seem unlikely that that wouldn't happen,
Right.
right?
That was another positive, though. Any contrarian, anything you think we might be overstating here?
I mean, I guess if I were going to say overstating slash like if it's muted and the impacts to real estate are unnoticed, but at the end of the day, I think it's really hard to say that we're not going to have increased spending. And in retail real estate, the usually the one of the biggest leading indicators is retail spending in a market. And so, I mean, if no one shows up to the World Cup events, sure,
Well, then we have bigger world problems, I think, if no
yeah,
one shows up. Something's wrong. One thing I think might be a little difficult to forecast is exactly where the spending will land. You just made the point of New York City, right? So I think the main events in New Jersey are in the Meadowlands, right? Which is not a walkable area in general. On the best day, it's not walkable at all. You're not spending time down there. That is a place where, if you're going to a concert or a sporting event, you typically, at least most people I know, typically drive, park, go, get back in your car. So, does the spending land in northern New Jersey? Does it land in Westchester, New York City? Is everyone staying in Manhattan, Brooklyn? Where do we see the biggest effects? And that might be different than, say, Dallas or Kansas City. I don't know those areas as well in terms of where the stadium is placed, but I think some markets will have a walkability, they'll have a more centralized, kind of flow of the city where the retail effects will be easier to trace. But New York is an example where I think it might be a little more dispersed. What are your thoughts on that?
yeah. I mean, I think that's true. I do think that's not unique to mega sporting events, right? If you were just watching the Olympics on TV, my family, I try to make sure we watch a lot of the events and support the US and do that. So we watched a lot, but like a lot of these things were at very different locations. And
True.
so it was bifurcated, right? Some were way up they would show like downtown Milan, and then they would show like, something like an
Mountains.
hour away,
Yeah.
in the mountains. Well, and some of the, so some of the like, I heard this thing that like it was hard for some teammates on other sports, like if you were a US participant, to go watch the other events because of the travel in between. So I don't think that's unique. So I think that's why it's hard to pinpoint who actually gets the economic output.
Right.
But generally speaking, if you just took locally, when New York does good, the surrounding does good.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's all positive. It's just which, I guess micro market is going to benefit the most might be kind of hard to predict in this particular case, but overall the region will benefit for sure.
Yeah,
I think that's the takeaway, but some areas might be more dispersed than others.
sure.
All in all, it's a positive. Anything else you want
Yes.
to share before we wrap?
I
Aside
think
from
that I think that's
tickets, if
it.
anyone has tickets they'd like to give to Chris and I, we're ready to go to the World Cup. So
There you go.
maybe that should be our concluding message today.
Awesome.
To everyone listening, that was this episode of What's in Store with Karly and Chris. We're so happy you tuned in, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks so much, Chris.
Bye, everyone.